So I'm Julie. I'm your second Welsh speaker of the day. What I'm going to do is talk about how we use data to ignite action where I work. So it's going to be a bit of a case study. And just to kick off, who here has seen The Matrix? Can I get a show of hands? Brilliant. Know your audience, right? So as most of you know, in The Matrix, our main character, Neo, he gets the choice of a red pill or a blue pill. If he takes the blue pill, that is him putting his head in the sand, that he gets to go back to his life, he gets to believe whatever he wants to believe, but he doesn't really know what's actually going on. If he takes the red pill, however, he faces an uncertain future, but he knows the truth about what's going on, and he gets an opportunity to influence that future. And when it comes to software delivery, I believe we have that exact same choice. So we can take our blue pill and we can march to hard deadlines, we can estimate, and we can believe the illusion of the estimated date. Or we can take a red pill and use data that represents the truth. And that is, software delivery is uncertain. We can't possibly know the outcome on day one. And a lot of the attempts and the ways we try to get to certainty can be really wasteful themselves. So I'm going to spend the next sort of 30 minutes taking you down the rabbit hole of how we've done this. So I'm going to go through some real data today, but I also want to caveat this with we're not perfect, and I'll go into some of that as well as we go along. So yeah, as I said, I'm Julie Starling. I work for Principality Building Society. So just to give you a bit of a context around the case study, it's a 160 years old organisation, so legacy is a thing. We do also have some really sort of new tech as well, but we have that blend of legacy when it comes to culture as well as tech. So I'm the practice manager, so I get to look after all the scrum masters and delivery managers and help them with their teams and the wider organisation. And I'm just really passionate about using data in a way to have conversations and take action. So not just vanity metrics and not just things that we share in board packs, but actually have conversations that influence the future. So I'll go back to this. So I'll talk a little bit about where we were. So we started this journey with data maybe about 5-6 years ago now. I'm sure a lot of you in the room are familiar with planning days. So we used to work in big programs. We used to spend a lot of time having they were more than planning days, they were planning day 2, 3. And we used to estimate a lot. And because of that, we were chasing deadlines a lot as well. So hopefully everyone in the room knows an estimate is just a best guess with the experience you've got and the knowledge about the situation that you have at the time. So obviously we were quite often wrong. And we'd spend a lot of time re-estimating. We'd even spend some time trying to get better at estimating. But actually what we were doing is solving symptoms and not problems. So we weren't really facing into the fact that, the sort of estimating our way to certainty just wasn't actually working for us. Today, we use a more probabilistic approach when we talk about software delivery. So we use probabilistic forecasting, and we have continuous conversations. We're talking about the data and we're looking for signals in that data to have a conversation and to take action. And alongside that, we use flow metrics and flow data to continually improve as we go along. So I'm going to talk about these 3 points today, give you some real examples and some real data into our context and how it's worked for us. I'm going to start with talking about what is late, so what does it actually mean? So there's an obvious interpretation. But actually, to me, if you're late when it comes to software delivery, it means you've probably mismanaged expectations. It means someone was expecting something certain by a certain date and they didn't get it, which means we've probably been planning for certainty in our uncertain world. Personally, I find being late really demotivating as well. I don't know if anyone here gets motivated by being late. No? No? Okay. Yeah, and I do actually get told sometimes, it's well, actually, no, you need a date. If you don't have a date, you don't have urgency, people will never deliver. In my experience, the more often you're late, the less you care about being late, because you're always late. That's just the way you work. And it's also a driver for really unsustainable behaviours. So that's when you might start doing some overtime, you might cut some corners, build up a bit of technical debt that you'll definitely get around to one day. And if you're working like this, you won't get around to it until you have to. But really importantly for me, it represents a lost opportunity to take action. So it means you set an expectation and something changed along the way and we didn't do anything about it. And if you're using the wrong data, it's not that you've chosen to do that, it's probably that you didn't see it happening. So, my favourite slide. I love Douglas Adams, so I couldn't resist an opportunity to quote him. I said at the start I work for a building society, so we're financially regulated. We don't always get to choose when we deliver things. We also have a bunch of product-based work as well, so it's a bit of a mix. And this approach works for both of these scenarios for us. So I'm going to start by talking about probabilistic forecasting and what it is. So whether you're talking about like the weather or economics, or in our case, software delivery, all we're saying when we're forecasting is we're using past and present data to make a prediction about the future. So when it comes to software delivery, what can this look like? So we always have a probability and a range. And you might be thinking, okay, what's that mean? What does that look like? Here are two examples. You'll notice they look a little bit different to each other, and that's because they're answering different questions. So one is telling us how much you're going to get by a date, and the other one's telling you when might you get this stuff, how many items you'll get by a date. So the probability part of these statements are the percentage. At principality, we use 85%. That's not right or wrong. That's almost an organisational risk decision. Because when you say there's an 85% chance of something happening, you're also saying there's a 15% chance that's not going to happen. So it's really important that that's communicated and understood. When we talk about the range part of these statements, so it's either the number of days or the number of items. There's a range there, and it depends on the question you're asking. Hopefully, when you look at these, you don't see any certainty. When you start showing this to people, they will look for the certainty in these statements. So for this first one, people see, oh, I'm getting my thing on the 31st of June. That's not what that says. And really, really, really importantly, is we need to continuously forecast. So it's not just a one and done. We don't do it monthly. It doesn't go in a ball pack off to someone just to tell them what the numbers are. It's being done every time the data changes so that we can have a conversation about what that means. So what do you need? Really, really simple. So you need the cycle time of 10 or more work items that were done by the same team, and the future looks like the past. And that's it. So I'll break that down a little bit because it is open for interpretation. So when we say cycle time, we mean, so whatever you've defined as your start and end of your process, so the start date and the end date, and you only need 10 or more of them. Obviously, more data is better than less, but you only need 10 to get started. When I say done by the same team, I mean, don't use one team's data to forecast for another team. That's not how this works. And then finally, when I say the future work looks like the past, I don't mean you've got to be doing the same thing over and over again. That's not what software delivery is. But what I mean is if you make any sort of drastic fundamental changes, so like you might change your entire tech stack, or how you structure work changes drastically, you need to have a new data set. And since you only need 10 items, it doesn't take long to get that. So once you've got this, what do you do with it? So you need to run a Monte Carlo simulation. I use Actionable Agile for this, and we have done for about 5 years. I'm not affiliated to them in any way, but they are really good. There are other ways of doing it. You can even do it in a spreadsheet. So I think I only have like about 25 minutes left, so we're not going to go into Monte Carlo forecasting in any depth, because which you'll probably be glad of being the end of the day slot. But I'll give you a bit of an in a nutshell view, and at the end of this talk as well, there's a bunch of resources, and please come and chat to me as well. I love talking about this stuff. But in terms of it in a nutshell view, so you have your data, you have your 10 items or more, and you ask it a question. So you either say, okay, when am I going to get this chunk of stuff, or how much stuff can I get by this date? And it looks at your data, and it just randomly picks your data points and answers the question. But it doesn't do that once. It doesn't do it like tens of times. It does it thousands and thousands of times. In fact, like this example here is a run of 1,000,000 times. And when we say there's an 85% chance of something happening on or before a date, we say now of all of those million simulations, 85% of them came out on or before a date. And it really is as simple as that. You might be sitting there thinking, I'm really contradicting myself now. So I'm saying plans and estimates can be wasteful, they're not accurate, but we should probabilistically forecast and we should do it all the time. But, the difference here is when you plan an estimate, that takes a team's time. That means that their focus switches from the work they're doing to doing those estimates, especially if you're doing them over and over and over. When you run a probabilistic forecast, it takes seconds. You don't need a team to do it. As soon as the data changes, it can run, and these take seconds to run. And in Actionable Agile, you get a nice little calendar like that as well, which will put the percentages over a calendar, which is really good for talking to stakeholders. Estimating is really, really hard, right? Not many people like doing it. You're asking someone, okay, here's this vague thing that we don't know everything about. If you could just guess how big it is or when we're going to have it, and we're not going to tell you how much you're going to context switch, how many meetings you're going to be in, how many people are going to be off sick, what dependencies there are might not be uncovered. You won't know all the complexity. But when you use probabilistic forecasting, these scenarios have already happened in your past. So as part of the random simulation, these get picked up in some of the answers. So you can be a bit more accurate, and you don't have to use the team. So, started updating my volume instead of doing this. Yeah, so the weather is a really, really good example of forecasting. So here is a 7-day you can't really see it that well. Here's a 7-day forecast that I did in June. And I did it the next day. And there are some changes to that. And then I did it again. And there are some changes. We accept with the weather that you get more information and the future changes. We still look at that because it gives us an indication of what's going to happen, and we keep our eye on the weather as we go along. Understanding software delivery is the same, is really, really important. We get more information as we go along. We need to update our forecast. And it's better to be approximately right than exactly wrong. So I promised some case studies. So I will now go into an example of where we had a team and we were using this approach alongside the continuous conversations. So this is going to be their story. Ooh, hopefully this will come out okay. I'm about to introduce one line to this graph, and this line will represent the amount of work left to do. So if this line goes up, it means we have more left to do. So it could be that we're uncovering complexity, splitting down stories, adding scope. And if it goes down, it means we have less to do. So it could be that we're burning through work, cutting scope, anything like that. So here we go. Here's day one. Our team start delivery. And you can see this line is trending down. That's good. What I'm going to do now is introduce a second line. And this line is going to represent the on or before date, so the forecasted range, so the 85% on or before this date. And if this line goes up, it means the forecast is moving out. And if it comes down, it means it's moving in. So here you go. You'll notice it doesn't start on the same day as the red line. And that's because, as I said, we need 10 or more items to get started. So we waited a little while. So this was a brand new team that formed. It was like a prototype team. They'd not worked together before. And we just had some features we wanted to get over the line. So this is why their story starts with no data. But what you're seeing here is the date range that's forecasted based on the data at that day. So how many work items we had left, using all the data we collected up until that point. So the team keeps delivering, and work items going down, and our forecasted date range is remaining pretty stable. So this is a pretty good news story. We're getting through work, and the forecast isn't changing much. And then this happens. So this is what I mean by saying this data really gives us signals to have conversations. So our work items are flattening out, and our forecasted date range is moving out. So this could mean a number of things, right? It could mean we're uncovering complexity, we could be blocked on something, it could mean a number of things. But it means we need to have a conversation. In this scenario, what was actually happening was this really new, enthusiastic team caught wind of a quite gnarly production issue and jumped on it and started helping. But they were absolutely the wrong team to be helping, even though it was the best intention. So we managed to get that work into another team, the more appropriate team, and they could keep delivering. And I'm not saying moving work out of a team is always the answer. In this situation, it was. But what we've got here now is the sort of red line starts trending down again, and our forecast has restabilized. It's probably worth pausing here for a little bit to see what's actually happened. So our forecasted date range is now later than it was before, so it might have stabilised, but it's a bit later. And, this gives us an opportunity. So quite early days, we're able to manage expectations, we're able to talk to people and explain why this is happening. It's not too late to have options to change the future. So when we find this stuff out right before we're about to be late, it's too late to do anything about it. But here we've got this signal at the earliest possible opportunity to do something about it. Also, whilst it's later, it's not as late as it would have been if we'd have not caught this. And this is the type of thing that happens under the hood where we may not think to re-estimate in a normal situation, but this allows us to manage these expectations or sort of take options of how to correct it. The next thing that happens, and I don't know if anyone here ever gets this, but, you're working on that. Whilst you're working on that, could you do these other things too? And normally there are two ways we would deal with that previously. We would either absorb the work and hope for the best, or we would spend some time re-estimating, which would also be time that we're not working on the stuff they want, therefore making it even later. So what we were able to do is go, we could, and it'd be about this big, and this is what it'd look like. And whilst we could do this anyway, tell people more scope, more time, it allows us to have a tangible conversation and explain what that costs, and lets you have those sort of really good conversations about, okay, so we could do this, or actually, if we stay delivering in smaller batches and it's the next most important thing, it'll get done. And if it's not the next most important thing, why are we doing it? So, yeah, it lets us have those really good conversations, and that's actually what happened in this scenario. So I talked a lot about the numbers. It's probably worth touching on the people side of this. So when I first started doing this, I was talking to teams, heads of departments, COO, that type of thing. And it's quite easy to get nods and agreements and buy-in. They're like, so you're going to manage my expectations, I'm going to get options, all sounds great, until your forecasted date range starts moving out. And that's when people go back to what they know, they cling to certainty, and it's a really human thing, right? You get uncomfortable, this has worked in the past, can I just have a team in a room estimating and giving me a plan? And this is where you really have to double down on the education. So we need to show that actually forecasting doesn't remove certainty. You never had it anyway. So these things were happening, you were just finding out about them too late, and you probably didn't even understand what those things were along the way, just that you hadn't met the expectation. And yeah, we have more information than we had before. And now we have options. So it might be an uncomfortable conversation, but we can do something about it right now. And if we were to aim for certainty, that means we're asking the team to not work on the stuff that we're already late on. Doesn't seem to make sense. What I was also able to do when we started doing this data is talk about flow metrics. So we're capturing our cycle time for probabilistic forecasting. We've actually got all the numbers we need now to do flow metrics. So as I talked about, we've got cycle time and a start and an end. If you imagine this sort of pinkish line is work moving from our start to our end point in our system, and all these green dots are work items. So for us, that's user stories. It could be features, tasks, whatever you call them, and whatever sort of level you're talking at. But if we've got an item that's got a start date and not an end date, we know exactly how old that item is, and that's our work item age. If we add up all of those items that have a start date but not an end date, that's our work in progress. And because we have an end date, we know the rate at which we're delivering, so we know our throughput. So our item age, our work in progress, as it sort of insinuates, is inside our system. So these are items we can actually do something about. They haven't finished yet. Their destiny isn't sealed. We can actually influence what these look like. And then they sort of become our cycle time and throughput once they've left the system. And hopefully everyone here knows that cycle time's a really, really important number because that represents the amount of time it takes for us to get feedback. So another case study. When I first started doing this, this is one of the teams I was working with back in 2018, I think it was. And this was their data. So this is a cycle time scatter plot. Every single dot on here represents a work item, so for us, stories, but again, this can apply at whatever sort of work item you use. The bottom axis tells us the date on which that work item was delivered, and the y-axis tells us how long it took, so the cycle time to get there. So we took this data into a retrospective, we were having a bit of a conversation, and noticed that our cycle times were longer than our sprint length. So with this team, we were doing Scrum, we were in sprints. You don't have to be to use this. So we had a bit of a conversation. We're like, okay, so what can we do about this? We proposed a bit of an experiment that we would try limiting our WIP for a certain number of sprints. And we didn't do this like in any sort of overly fancy way. We didn't do columns or people or swim lanes or however you want to do it. We just did a system WIP. We were like, we won't allow more than 5 items in our system. And we carried on like that. The team honoured it. We did the experiment. But it wasn't very long before I started getting people coming to me going, this doesn't feel right. This is really uncomfortable. I feel like I'm not being productive. We're not doing as much before, and we've got a bit of time. So we looked at the data, and this is what it showed us. So our throughput actually wasn't going down, but our cycle time was. So we could then have a better conversation. We could say, okay, so you feel like you're doing less, but we're delivering the same. So maybe you're not burnt out anymore. It could be that. It could be that we maybe need to play with these WIP limits a little bit. It could be that we put this time into maybe personal development. What we actually did was start to get a bit more sophisticated with our WIP limits and our columns and adjust it like that over time. But it let us have that conversation. Another thing this chart lets us do is what is known as single item forecasting, and allows us to set a service level expectation for our system. So this is exactly the same chart as before, except we have percentile markers on the side. And these percentile markers represent the number of items under each line. So if I give you an example of an 85% line. So over this time frame, 85% of our work items are below this line, which means we can say, as long as our system is performing like this, there's an 85% chance of delivering a single item in 21 days or less. And this is something we, back in the office, pre-COVID days, we would have on our boards, we'd have conversations about it every morning. And yeah, it allows us to have those sort of daily conversations. But it's really important that we look at what data we're using when we do this. So, and same with the sort of multiple item forecasting that Monte Carlo gives us. So we did an experiment in the middle of here. So we significantly changed our ways of working, and on a permanent basis. It wasn't just a fluctuation, and there weren't anomalies. We changed the ways of our working. So if we look at this before the experiment, there was an 85% chance of delivering an item in 7 days or less. And after, it was 25 there, 7 days there. So obviously, once you've done something like this, you just start using the new data for your single and your multiple item forecasts. Everyone here familiar with Schrodinger's cat? Thought experiment, cat in a box. You don't know if it's dead or alive until you open the box. Let me introduce you to Schrodinger's work item. So we all hope that we're working on valuable work, we're listening to our customers, we believe what we're doing is going to add value. Until we deliver it, we don't really know. So it's potentially valuable. And I guess the point I'm making here is not that we need to be questioning what we're working on so much, we should, but that we need to keep the cat in the box for the smallest amount of time possible. We need to understand, is this valuable or not, as soon as possible. So how do you stop things unnecessarily aging? So how do we stop things getting old? And this is limited to work items. I don't have the answer for humans. So there's 2 really simple ways. You don't start it. If you haven't started it, it's not getting old. And then you can finish it. Once you've finished it, it's not getting old. And I know that's really unhelpful. So what I mean by this is, don't start your items until you know they can flow through the system. And then when you do, manage that work in progress with the goal of finishing. You want to keep your work as busy as possible. You want to make sure that you're getting that work to the finish line. And there are a number of ways we can do this. So we can limit the amount of work in progress. So we talked about that example earlier. We can make the items small. So the smaller they are, the easier they're going to flow, less likely to hit dependencies. And you can take action on those items that are necessarily aging. So that's the managing that work in progress. So you might be thinking, okay, so how do you know if something's too old? So I showed you a cycle time scatter plot. This is a really, really simple aging chart. So what we've got on here is 3 work items. You probably can't see on the screen, but one is 3 days old, one is 6 days old, and one is 12 days old. So these are items that are in our system. They haven't finished. So how do we know which ones of these is too old? So hopefully you remember from a few slides ago, we calculated an SLE. So we can overlay this onto our aging chart and have conversations around the ones that are over the line or creeping towards the line. So by the very nature of the SLEs, 15% of them should be going over them. But if you're managing this work in progress, our SLEs are going to come down over time too, and we're going to become more predictable. So back to this chart. Can anyone shout out, please? How many story points do you think we gave this item up here? So this took 60 days to do. This was before we did our experiment. 8. 1, 5. Yeah, that's as random as story points are, right? So it was actually a 3. All the items down here are also 3 here too. Even after the experiment, we had like a 10-day variance on 3-point stories. So story points don't equate to time. They were never meant to equate to time, I know that. I find this is the same if we estimate in story points or time. And this isn't a team that was bad at estimating either. I see this time and time again, team after team. And I'm not here to hate on story points either, so if anyone's like booing me in your heads, I'm sorry. I do actually buy there is value in them in some places if you're having your conversation, driving out understanding, but let's not use them to manage expectations or to plan. And then finally, throughput. So this is probably a chart we use less these days, but when we first started getting into this, so this is like an accumulated view of a couple of teams of the throughput over time. So this green trend line is going up in this case because we were doing lots of ways of working changes and getting better and better. This line doesn't always go up, and then that's another signal for a conversation. So why is that? Is it Christmas? Is everyone on holiday? Are we blocked? Do we need to do something about it? And also when it's going up as well, why is it going up? Can we share that knowledge? Is there something we can learn from it? Can we do more of it? So that's me. And so I'll just recap what we've got through. So probabilistic forecasting, we use that because software delivery isn't certain, and we need to stop treating it like it is. We need to have continuous conversations along the way to manage expectations. They might be difficult, they might be uncomfortable, but it's far better to have them earlier than later if you care about your outcomes. And it means that we're now solving problems instead of symptoms. And finally, flow metrics on top of all that help you continuously improve along the way. So I said I'd share a bunch of resources. So these are just some of the ones I've used over the years. If you really want to learn more about probabilistic forecasting, those 2 end books by Dan Bacanti are really good. I will share the slides with the conference after if anyone wants these links. But that is me. Thank you very much.